Well, hello everyone. I want to tell you a story about Sally and Paul, who were married for 30 years. Very early in their marriage, in the first couple of years, Paul forgot Sally's birthday. Although Sally had made it very well known to Paul how much she loved celebrating birthdays. And Sally made a point to drop little hints when her birthday was coming up. So you can imagine how devastated Sally was when Paul forgot that year, and boy, did she let him know it. Now, when he saw how hurt Sally was, and when he thought about all the ways that she went out of her way to make him happy, to let him have things that he enjoyed, he felt terrible. He apologized profusely, and then to make amends, he threw her a surprise birthday party 2 weeks after the fact that she just loved. She ate it up. She was delighted. They made up. Except, after that, whenever Paul and Sally would have any major kind of argument, Sally just seemed to want to always bring up this time when he had forgotten her birthday. And finally, after years and years and years of this, he said to her one day, "Honey, that happened 28 years ago." He said, "I haven't forgotten your birthday since. I haven't forgotten any of our major celebrations. I've really gone out of my way to do things that you like." He said, "I don't understand. Why do you keep bringing that up? I thought your philosophy was forgive and forget." To which Sally replied, "It is. I just want to make sure that you don't forget that I've forgiven and forgotten." Okay. Sounds like forgiveness to me. This forgiveness thing can really be a problem. Another word was coming to mind. A challenge, difficult, can't it? So why forgive? Why do we need to forgive? Well, I have a couple of reasons I thought I'd share. One is because that's what nice people do, which in and of itself might appeal to the ego, because the ego likes to be perceived as a good person. Because the Bible says we're supposed to, because Jesus said so, because Buddha and the Dalai Lama and Mother Teresa and Gandhi, and not only that, A Course in Miracles, the realm of psychology, even modern medicine is saying that it's helpful to forgive. That's kind of compelling. How about that the world would really be a better place, wouldn't it? If people were able to forgive more easily? That's definitely food for thought, I think. But let me tell you something. If on any level you perceive that forgiving involves relinquishing some sense of well-being, of giving in to something that is not going to feel good, that in any way you are marginalized or compromised by doing so, you will resist it. Why? What do we keep teaching you over and over again in Science of Mind? Is that our core nature, the nature of everything in the universe, is God's nature, right? That God lives fully and equally present in each and every one of us, everywhere in creation. So our core nature is one of goodness, and we feel it as that impulse to feel good, to experience joy and wholeness and abundance and well-being in every way we can. That's the impulse of God's goodness seeking and experiencing expression of itself through us. Now, why we don't always experience that goodness or see goodness out there is that our view of goodness may be very limited. So if we're coming from a place of my good versus your good, we're coming from a place of some fear, and then we see some of the effects of that out in the world. But still, there's always that impulse toward good. So we are wired to feel good, and sometimes we need to expand our consciousness to a greater awareness of what goodness really is, that the goodness of God is for everything and everyone and against nobody, you know? So if you're being able to embrace forgiveness on a bigger level means that you have to understand it's for your well-being, hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. The answer to why forgive is because we'll feel better. So please repeat after me. As I forgive, I am happier.
I am happier.
Again, let's say it together. As I forgive, I am happier. As I forgive, I am happier. Yes. Okay. So let me explain a little about why that really is so. See, I think to really understand forgiveness, and to embrace it more, we need to know what forgiveness is and what forgiveness isn't. And the quote that I go back to every time I need to remind myself comes from Jesus on the cross when we heard, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." He did not say, "What they do is fine. Oh, a little crucifixion. Okay, so people don't show up very well sometimes. No problem." He did not say that. He said, "They know not what they do." In other words, they are not fully awake yet. They do not realize their oneness with God. They do not realize that we're all interconnected. And that's why they're behaving this way. But there's a part of them that's bigger than that. I'm forgiving that they are not fully awake. He's not forgiving what they were doing. So let me start first with self-forgiveness. When we learn to forgive ourselves, that doesn't mean that we're ignoring any wrongdoings. We are able to admit to any way that we may have erred and maybe possibly hurt someone. We're able to admit it, but we're able to realize that the God presence in us is bigger than that. We can call it forth. We can then move forward and act in a way that is not harmful anymore. We learn from the mistake and move forward. That's all we need to do. And the same goes, in a sense, for this forgiveness of others. See, when we're forgiving ourselves, we're forgiving the fact that we were coming from where we were before we made the realization that that's not the way to be. When we're forgiving others, what we're looking at is the fact that they are coming from their level of consciousness, their beliefs, their fear patterns, or whatever. But there's a part of them that's bigger than that, and there's a part of us that's bigger than any hurt that we're feeling based on their behaviors. And we can call that bigger part of us forward and not be victimized by their behaviors. You see, if we hold on to our hurt, our anger, our rage, whatever, what we're basically saying is, I can't be happy unless that person comes and apologizes, that person realizes what they did and does better, or that person is punished. God is sitting there in us trying to come forth and say, it's okay, whatever they did, I'm bigger than this. You can move on. You can be happy. You don't have to be a victim. We're going, no, I'm not going to be happy until they suffer. Okay. But please realize what forgiveness is not. It is not about being a doormat. It is not about saying, oh, well, I'll just suck it up. Let them be okay. I'll just sit here and be a martyr. It's all right. I don't deserve any more happiness. Let them go on. It is not about condoning any of those actions, either their errors or our own. It's not about that. One of the examples for me that I really loved years ago, I was watching a TV series on venomous snakes. And in this documentary, they covered a story about an Indian man, a man from India, who had been a snake handler for about 40 years and was working in the Miami Zoo. And on 9/11, he was bitten by a taipan snake, which is apparently one of the most venomous snakes in the world. And they found out that they didn't have the appropriate antivenom there in Miami to save his life. Now, all flights had been grounded, but they found out they could get the antivenom from San Diego. The US military pulled together this whole action where they were able to fly the antivenom to Miami, and they got it to him just in time to save his life. And I remember being so touched, by the way, afterwards when they were talking to him, because afterwards he eventually went back to handling snakes again. And he looked and he says, I'm sorry, I have to give my best rendition of an East Indian accent because I love it so much. I think I should have been born there, I don't know. He goes, I don't blame the snake. The snake was just being a snake. The snake didn't know what he was doing. And it was just said with absolutely no rancor, no hostility. There was no like, oh, I just can't wait. That snake just got some bad karma, and I'm going to watch till that snake suffers. No, it was just, I don't blame the snake. But I'll tell you something. I bet you anything he didn't jump into the pen the next day without any protection and go, oh, I know you didn't mean any harm. Come here, give Daddy a kiss. He didn't subject himself again to being bitten. And actually, what I learned after the fact, a colleague of mine, is one of these 6 degrees of separation stories. A colleague of mine knew someone who knew this man, and she had watched the documentary also, and mentioned that what they didn't cover was how he had been so moved and so appreciative that the US military went to that extent to save his life on that day. He was so appreciative to be alive and to be able to go back being more careful to handling snakes. Now, the thing about that is to move forward, he also had to forgive himself. Couldn't he have gotten in a pattern after 40 years? How could I have been so stupid? Blah, 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 blah. No, he had to realize he made a mistake, learn from it, and move forward. That's the whole empowerment of forgiveness. Now, going back to forgiving others, let me make it clear. I get that there's a bit of a difference between a taipan snake and that person next to you who may have done something very hurtful. I know we realize that human beings are more self-aware in this way, that we can recognize that we're able to change. So I think we intuitively sense that when someone is hurtful, they have the capacity, that's not their full true nature, they have the capacity to wake up, to change, to show up as a better person that we can appreciate better. But you know what? The problem is we cannot control others. If they are not ready, if for whatever reason their fear patterns are such that they can't see what you're trying to invite them to see, and I think it's perfectly appropriate to speak up, to try and get people to understand the other side. But if they don't, do you want to stay in your state of suffering? Do you want to give your power away to whether or not they change? Doesn't make sense, does it? I read an article by a therapist who was writing to really teach the principle of forgiveness and the power of forgiveness. And she wrote about a woman named Barbara who, after years, managed to find the courage to leave what had been a long-term, verbally and physically abusive relationship with her husband. She left him, she divorced him, moved away so they could have no more contact. And when she came for therapy, she was so filled with rage at what had happened to her, and also rage against herself for having stayed in that relationship as long as she had. Now, if you were here last Sunday, our beloved Mark Anthony Lord, Reverend Mark Anthony, gave a talk about where he was saying we don't throw away or try to get rid of these feelings of rage. What we do is we process them and then direct them in a positive way, right? So what the therapist did with Barbara is she taught her to realize that the rage was that part of her that awakened to tell her, you do not deserve abuse or disrespect. Nobody does. So that was what it was telling her. And the rage against herself was just to realize, okay, this is for you again to get. Do not put yourself in that situation. You don't deserve this. But you were operating from where you were, that you were afraid. It took a while for you to get the courage, but now you're there. You've had the courage, you've left. You can put it down. And as she understood that, she was able to put the rage down and move forward. She got married again. She was very happy. She didn't expect to hear anything from her ex-husband. But then one day, she said this is when she really knew she had forgiven. One day, she received a request, I guess it was a subpoena or something. She was asked to testify against her ex-husband in court. He had been charged by a woman who was accusing him of physical abuse, and that I guess the DA wanted to establish that this had been a recurring pattern. And she said when she went there, she heard about what happened. She absolutely recognized the pattern. She knew it had happened. But when she sat in the witness stand, just stating the facts about what had happened in her relationship with Jack, she said, I felt no need for vengeance. I felt nothing except to just state the facts that I needed to speak up for a greater good. And afterwards, she had a moment where she actually got to spend a little time with Jack privately. She seized the opportunity to walk up to him. And she said to him, Jack, there are so many good things about you that I fell in love with. She said, but you know, she said, this part of you, I hope you'll get help to control this violent behavior. She said, you can't go on hurting people like this, Jack. You're bigger than that. And she felt so complete, and she just walked away. She thought they were done, but 5 years later, she got a letter from Jack in which he stated that the way she looked at him without any rage, without any sense of vengeance, and said what she said, kind of cut through something. And he heard the part about there was a bigger part of him, that he was bigger than that. And so he had, I believe he had to do some jail time, but he was also forced to do anger management therapy. But he said he really put his heart into it. He really went for it. And when he wrote to her, he said, I have to thank you because I really, really believe I'm a better person because of you. He said, I don't play out the way I used to, and I keep working on it, and I'm a much happier person. But he said, I think back on the things I did to you, and I can't say I'm sorry enough. I hope you can find it within yourself to forgive me, if it's even appropriate for me to ask that. Their last communication was Barbara writing back to him, saying, Jack, I am so glad that you got help and that you were able to overcome this pattern of violence. She said, but let me tell you, I forgave you a long time ago. But now you need to forgive yourself. It sounds like the person you are today is not the person you were. You're a bigger person now. So let that better person that you are today really express himself fully, and don't stay stuck in the past. Go forward. That is the message of forgiveness. Now tell me, is that not empowering? You know, it's wonderful. Yeah, yay Barbara and Jack, right? You know, it's beautiful to see it come full circle, but I think the important part of the message is that if Jack hadn't changed, Barbara would still have been okay. She was okay to go forward with her life, you know? So please understand, I get that even though we can understand this intellectually, we can't necessarily just go from being absolutely hurt to, okay, forgiving. I'm better. And we need to be compassionate and show forgiveness for ourselves, that we can't necessarily just jump, make that leap right away. But what I would encourage us to do in such times is, again, I go back to You have to feel the benefit of it to really be motivated. So we need to focus on how much better we will feel if we forgive. So I'm just going to ask you to take a moment to call to your mind anyone, or it could be a group, that you feel has hurt you, that you are having trouble forgiving. And just in this moment, imagine yourself being in a place that whether they change or not, you are at peace. You don't need anything from them. You are not riled up. You are just in your sense of well-being. So being in that place, I invite you to, in your mind, go through the process of seeing that person or that group and saying, I accept you and I bless you. And if you want, you can do, I accept you with the in-breath, I bless you with the out-breath. I accept you, I bless you. And if it's some area where you're having trouble forgiving yourself, see that bigger part of yourself that's bigger than the mistake, that's aware of the mistake, and that doesn't need to stay tied up in that energy of the mistake. And call forth that idea of, I accept you, I bless you. And you know, if you find yourself resisting this, because I'm going to invite you to do that periodically as you go forward, anytime you feel that resentment coming up, to go through that, I accept you, I bless you. And if you're resisting it, go back to remembering how much better you're going to feel to be free of this. Let that keep motivating you to move forward. Know that for all the pain and acts of hatred that we hear of, for every step that you take toward feeling your wholeness and how you're not affected, you get to step into that and experience more wholeness. You know, and God knows there's so many situations out there, not even in our personal lives. Let's look at what's happened in our country over the last couple of weeks that we could feel hurt by. In our moments, so many of us that want to celebrate, and we're hearing people who are, you know, feeling fearful and hateful, and hearing those opinions can be hurtful. But imagine being able to just stay in that place of centeredness. When we do, we move forward, and that is our gift to the world, to show people the power of, I don't need anything from you to feel good. We bring that consciousness into the world and it ripples out. And the best part, folks, is we get to feel better every step of the way. How's that for a payoff? Let's pray. So, as we turn our attention inward, just feeling that presence in us at every moment is ready to experience and express love, joy, wholeness, abundance, peace. That part of us that is the life of God that lives in all things, in all situations, that fills and surrounds us every moment. And let us know that that is a power of presence that is greater than anything that has ever happened to us, any act of ours that we later regret, any idea of wrongdoing that anyone has done to us. That part of us is so much greater than that. And as we turn our attention to that and let it come forth, we are free. We are free of the pain. We are free of the hurt. We get to step in and let that presence of God shine forth through us. We get to realign and feel our power, feel our wholeness, and experience and express it more fully in the world. I know that we're blessed by coming together in this time and knowing this truth together. I know that prayer is a blessing to all those in the world who right now are not feeling that connection with that presence of God. And so knowing that God is fully present in all situations that might call to our attention, prayers for loved ones, situations in the world, we know that God is right there. We bless our church, we bless all churches everywhere, synagogues, temples, mosques, ashrams, all paths to God. And with a full and grateful heart for the goodness that God is in us always, I release this word knowing it is so. I let it be, and so it is. And together we say, Amen.